of a meeting. We usually do weekly meetups every Sunday around this time. Um, so unfortunately, two of our team members couldn't make it today. Unicron seems to be having some time housing issues, as he stated in the meetup chat, and Crypto Mom is currently in the process with moving, so she was unable to make this meeting as well. But I'm sure there's going to be some new listeners to this meeting, so I'm going to probably go over some things that a lot of the people immediately here will be familiar with. So the first thing to cover is the vote that recently happened within our community. There was a vote conducted in the community of whether Novusphere should seek the direction of building on EOS. And over the last little while, I sort of built out some things using EOS's existing technology to start working on a form that leveraged what Novusphere is working on, so the decentralized database concept, and using EOS as the underlying blockchain to power that database. So Novusphere, as a general concept, is a decentralized database that utilizes a blockchain as its data source. So the overall idea is any centralized website or service that typically relies on a regular database, you can use Novusphere instead, and this actually gives you a decentralized database where you're no longer liable for what is essentially in that database, since all that content comes from the blockchain. It also means that you can create open source applications that anyone can use, because anyone can reconstruct the same database that you're using. So, for example, at this point in time, we moved EOS form over to eos-form.org, and it's not mandatory actually for you to go to our website to use the form. You can actually install everything on your own computer, and you can actually do everything locally, and you don't actually need to rely on our database or any of that. And the source code is fully auditable. It's fully open source, and so anyone is free to use it, modify it, and help contribute to it. So the vote concluded, and it was heavily in favor of EOS. I think it was almost a 99% approval rating, and it was something over 45 million at most was used to vote. So that's pretty close to 45% of our total supply. It's a little less than that because the total supply is around 110 million. But we got a pretty good voter turnout, and the community spoke pretty well on that they want to continue in the direction of building on EOS. So that does a few things for us, because it speeds up our timeline in terms of developing things. So now we can start focusing on things like building applications using Novusphere DB instead of needing to focus on building the underlying blockchain layer, because in this case, we're just using EOS. So it saves us a lot of time and gets us going a lot faster in terms of things that we want to build. So the first application that we're really focusing on at this time is the form application, which we're currently calling EOS Form. And that is a decentralized Reddit-style form that we're currently working on. And there are some other cool applications that are going to be in the works that you'll probably see in the near future, which might be something like a video streaming interface that might resemble a traditional streaming site. And something along the lines of an idea I recently tossed out in the chat was sort of like an EOS name server DNS sort of app, where you could use your account name on EOS as a subdomain, and then sort of point that to something like IPNS or something like that, so that you could have a more friendly URL to share to people instead of needing to share your IPNS URL, which is a little clunky and looks a little funny to people. So that's mainly what's been going on in our community for the last little while. So now, some information for our community. I was going to talk about how we're going to transition our existing token, Atmos, over to the EOS network. So to those listening who don't know, Atmos at this time runs on its own network, its own blockchain. And that blockchain was intended from the very start to just be a temporary blockchain. It was a fork of Blackcoin. So it's nothing special, nothing too out of the ordinary. Um, and so we're going to be transitioning that over to the EOS network as an EOS token. Um, so there's a few complications in doing this because it's not a seamless process where we can just take a snapshot and then everyone will automatically get their Atmos on EOS. So we're going to have to go through somewhat of an exchange process, and this will be very similar to like when Atmos was first issued. So how this will work, or at least how I see it working at this point in time, is we will collect the Atmos, the current existing token on the temporary blockchain from people, and then we will reissue to them Atmos on the EOS blockchain. And I see this being advantageous in two ways, which is it lets the token on Cryptopia to continue trading, and we don't actually need to tell them to halt trading or do any of that. So that token can continue trading on there, which provides a means of liquidity and easy access for people who are new to the community, a way to pick up and buy some Atmos if they're interested in doing that. And it allows for people to move onto the EOS platform sort of at will. So that's probably like a service that will run for at least, I want to say, a year to let people move from the temporary chain over to the new chain, or sorry, not to the new chain, to EOS. Um, Another reason that we don't want to just immediately do this is at this point in time, there's not really a lot of places that you can easily trade EOS tokens. So the only exchange that's really listing tokens in mass at this point in time is Chain CE. And there are, I mean, for example, IQ, which is an EOS token, is trading on Bitfinex, but for example, Binance, to my knowledge, hasn't launched any EOS tokens on its platform yet, and so there's not really an accessible place to trade EOS tokens, and EOS itself doesn't have a decentralized exchange at this point in time. But we know that that's something that Dan's working on, so we know that that's right around the corner. So just to recap on all of that, the way the transition will work is we'll eventually launch a service in the upcoming weeks where we'll be collecting Atmos from people, the Atmos on the temporary blockchain, and you'll supply us with an EOS account name, and then we'll issue that. We'll issue the Atmos over to you on EOS, and so that's how we'll take care of that transition. And so another thing to talk about is the upcoming changes for the forum. So some of the features that are currently in the works that are a little more longer in terms of the time it takes to implement and test these features are the spam prevention mechanisms, which you can read about in the informal document that we published on GitHub a while ago. I'll put a link to that in the meetup chat. Give me 1 second. So there's that document where you can read an overview about what the form is and how we see it working. So there are some features that are currently being worked on that's going to take a little bit longer to put out. So we're talking the spam prevention mechanisms, which are blocking, opt-in moderation, and proxy moderation, the voting system, and there's some other features that are currently in the works, such as private DMing, and searching for posts and content filters. So searching for posts would work very similarly to Reddit. So you would be able to do sort of a global form search with certain filters to look for specific posts or content that you're looking for on the forum. And as for private DMing, just to throw a small thing in there. We had some discussion about this in the chat. The way I see private DMing currently working is implementing it using something called the Diffie-Hellman. So I don't want to go into too much like details about this because it'll get yeah, exactly. It'll get too computer science oriented, and I don't think it's like this is like the appropriate place for that conversation. But there was a concern that was associated with this, which is that elliptic curve cryptography is vulnerable to quantum in the future. So that there is a risk that I think that should be known that when we, and we'll have a disclaimer for this, which is that in the future, when you can do the private DMs, there is a risk with quantum in the future being able to break elliptic curve cryptography, and this would actually break it in such a way where someone would actually be able to read these private DMs. So this is something to take into consideration when using that service. And I think it's important to point out to people as well that Monero actually uses elliptic curve cryptography as well. So, for the time being, it's true that the transactions are fully anonymous, and it's pretty much as good as it's going to get at this point in time. But that should be a security concern for people in the future as well, which is um, when quantum computers are really capable of doing this stuff, and who knows how long that'll be. That could be, years, decades, or however long. Um, that Monero's transaction history won't be as anonymous as it is right now at this point, or at least its history, anyways. I'm sure at some point they'll introduce some quantum resistant mechanisms. So those are the features that we're working on. That's going to take a little bit longer to actually build out. And so I see some of these features like the spam mechanisms and the voting system coming into play, likely around either like mid to late August or like early September. And then some of the earlier features that we're looking to get out over the course of the next few days, few weeks is we recently introduced it collapsible comments. So this was a feature requested by Fixed, a member of the Discord. So that's just basically you can collapse a comment tree down, so it makes it a little easier to go through some of the bigger threads. Right after this meeting, I'm looking to introduce the all subreddit. So that's, or I guess I should just say sub, not subreddit. um, to introduce the all sub, um, which basically will show you posts from all the subs that exist on the forum. So it sort of like lets you see all like the new things that are being posted instead of you needing to go to each specific individual sub. So that'll be released sometime shortly after this meeting. Other features that are upcoming are the ability to sub and unsub to subs. So what that means is at the top of the interface at this point in time, you have some predetermined subs that are given to you, like EOS, Novusphere, General, etc. So you'll be able to sub to other subs, and that will add it automatically to the top for you, or you'll be able to unsub from subs, and that'll remove it from the top for you. So you'll be able to customize essentially what's at the top for you to tailor subs that you're interested in. So if you didn't know at this point in time, you can actually change the URL you're on to a random sub, and you can just start posting on there. You don't actually have to create a sub. As long as like you go to the URL, the sub's like already there, and you can start using it. Another feature that you can expect in the upcoming days, days to weeks, is we're going to show a visual indicator for new posts. So this is a feature that a lot of people have been asking for, which is when a new post is made in a thread, and you're just browsing it through, let's say the index page on the sub page, you want to see some sort of visual indicator that says, hey, this thread has some new comments in it. You should check it out. So it sort of makes it easier to keep track of what you've read and what you haven't read. Another feature that we're looking to introduce in the near future is user profiles. So that'll break down some general things like a user's EOS balance, their Atmos balance, the Atmos they've earned on the forums, how many posts they've made, how many threads they've made, and like post history. So just generally what you'd expect out of a user profile. Um, Another thing is permalinking. So what a permalink is, or at least Reddit uses this name, is it's a way to link to a comment within a thread. So you can link to a comment that somebody made instead of linking directly to the thread. So that's another feature that we're gonna look to introduce soon. This is another feature that I think is really cool that was proposed by Road Crypto in our community, which is we're going to look to expand the use of the anonymous account outside of the anon sub, and what we're going to do is we're going to make it so that the anon account can post from any sub that starts with anon dash. So, for example, anon dash politics, the anonymous account would be able to post in that sub. So I think that's a good way to get a wider scope of the anonymous account being used and sort of help organize the content. Um, we know that an obvious problem with that, though, at this point in time is without the spam prevention mechanisms that it can be abused and that people can post things that aren't relevant to the sub that they're in on the anon subs, and there's nothing that we can do too much about it at this point in time. So I'm just hoping that the community doesn't abuse it too much. At least until we have those spam prevention mechanisms in, which should be in play by, like I said, end of August, early September. And then lastly, another important feature that I think the forum needs is, and this was previously requested, is the ability to see the edit history. So at this point in time, you can edit posts on the forum, and our interface shows you the most recent edit, but obviously you might want to go back and see, hey, what did this person have before they edited their post? You know, maybe they're trying to be sneaky and they made a claim about something and then they tried to retract their statement. Well, you know, fortunately, all that information's on the blockchain, so there's a record of that, and we can pull their entire history on of what they've posted previously. So that should give you guys an idea of what's coming in like the next couple days and what's currently being worked on in the long term in terms of what'll take a little bit more time in regards to the forum. Um, I think other than that, the only other major announcement I have is over the next few weeks, I am unfortunately going to be unavailable again on the upcoming weekends, so I won't be able to attend the meetings, or at least the next like 2 meetings on the weekends. So Unicron and CryptoMom will have to decide whether they want to continue doing the meetings for those weeks. Um, but I'll still be around, of course, on the Discord, and like I said, you'll see those development changes made over the course of the next couple days. So if you have any questions, as usual, feel free to tag me, or just bring it up in the general chat or something, and I'll be around to comment on it. So if anyone has any questions on our Discord at this time, or if they want to talk verbally, now would be a great time. Or maybe there's something I've missed. So. Surprised I've been able to ramble on for about 20 minutes now. So I believe he is still working on it. So I last talked to him, I think, 2 days ago about this, and he told me that he's been busy at his real life job, so he hasn't had as much time to put into the interface, but it is something he's still working on. So Uh, maybe he can comment on it on the Discord, or maybe you can DM him and ask. But that's more or less what I know. Is just he's been busy and hasn't been able to commit as much time to working on it. Um, Yes, Fixed brings up a really good question, which is the form-based airdrops. So we mentioned this on Reddit, which is um, we may look to take and look at some snapshots of the form after voting has been introduced. Um, and after voting has been introduced and you can upvote and downvote people, we might look to reward some people some Atmos from the development fund and sort of give away Atmos to some of the good content being posted on the forum. We're already seeing some of the members of our community issue bounties that can be easily filled by like anyone, such as posting up certain videos or posting memes or something like that. So the community is overall very generous in terms of what they offer to people and helping spread Atmos to a lot of the newcomers into the community. So you can look forward to some sort of like forum airdrops in the future, where as long as you're using the forum and you're participating and you're posting good content, you'll receive some free Atmos, or we'll look to do something similar to that in the future. So thanks for reminding me about that, Fixed. So I guess one thing I forgot to cover is I guess I should give some details on this in terms of the smart contract programming on chain sort of thing in terms of the project at this point in time. Another team member named Unicron is working on that. And so maybe at the next meeting, if he's available, then he can give the community an update about what's going on his side of things. So we left off last week, he had started working with some of the contracts on EOS to implement a bounty system. And the way our bounty system works, just to give you a brief summary of it, is someone creates a bounty, you have a bounty hunter who fulfills it, and then if there's any disputes over whether the bounty was filled correctly or whether it wasn't, or who should act, or which bounty hunter should receive the bounty, um, an arbitration claim can be brought forward, and then elected judges handle that. And so the judges are elected by the Atmos holders. And so Atmos is used as a means of helping good content get onto the overall platform itself, good content get into the database. It doesn't have to just be in the forum. It's any content going into the database. So we see this being used outside of the forum, and the bounties would be denoted in Atmos as well. So we really see Atmos as the backbone of our ecosystem. So Road Crypto asks, can we get some appointed IPFS server until we get proof of hosting, like Loots? So can you explain what you mean by an appointed IPFS server? I'm a little confused as to what you mean by that. So I would be in favor of this if it wasn't for the fact that if we allow people to upload things to us and then we host it on IPFS, there's a bit of ambiguity in terms of how liable we are for that. Yeah, I mean, if someone wants to take on that role of hosting IPFS content for people, that could potentially be bounty oriented, and I mean, it could be very similar to like some of the video bounties that we're seeing already out there, which is, hey, here's my file on a static data source, like here's a backup link to my file on, HTTP where you can download it. Can you download my file and host it on IPFS for me? So that might be one of the uses of the bounty system, as you said. Yeah, so as Evo pointed out, EOS storage is in the works. So that's another mechanism that we'll look to build into our form at a later point. So I guess I should touch on this for people that aren't familiar. Novusphere is not solely dependent on using IPFS for content. We can actually make use of other storage layers. It just takes integrating into the front end code of how that information is presented to the user and how to get it, how to give the user access to the storage layer. So uh, a misconception in the past about whether Atmos competes with storage coins, but actually it works complementary to them. Yeah, actually, the form already supports magnet links. Um, I believe someone had tested that in the earlier days of the form, and I had written some integration for that. So if you post a magnet link, you should be selecting URL for the type, and then you should be selecting link for the how to display it to the user. And yeah, people could include a magnet link as a backup source for the content as well if they wanted it to be hosted on IPFS. Yeah, so just to clarify again about um the storage cryptos, Atmos and Novusphere DB works complementary to it because you can make a reference to the storage crypto or however it's stored on there. So in the case of IPFS, the way you make a reference to it is you use the IPFS hash, and you'd store that reference um, in Novusphere DB, and then the interface can display that to the user, assuming there's some way to display the content to the user knowing the reference or some sort of way. So if there's enough demand for it in the future, we could integrate alternative storage layer mechanisms. So obviously, at this point in time, there's support for standard um, web layer where you were going through HTTP. There's support for IPFS. I'm going to actually look into at a later point. It's not a huge priority at this time, which is the way we're currently getting the content from IPFS is we're going through IPFS.io, and we're using their HTTP bridge to get the data off of IPFS. But I actually have come across implementations of IPFS that work fully in browser. And so I might look to use something like that and actually have it connect to the network instead of depending on IPFS.io. So that might be something I look into in the future. I think the EOS storage will definitely be a really popular storage mechanism on EOS, so that's something that I can see being integrated. And if, like I said, there's enough demand for other storage mechanisms, be it other, storage coins or whatever, we can see integration of those into the platform. So if anyone else has any questions, I'm happy to answer them at this point in time. Yeah, I'd like to actually. That's a good point. I'm gonna personally welcome these people. I'd like to welcome Evo and Peter Griffin. I see there are two new people that are on our Discord that are participating in the weekly meetings. One of the things that I'd like to change in the near future is have Crypto Mom communicate with the community and sort of try to figure out if there's a better time to do these meetings at that would result in a better turnout for the community in terms of the live discussions. Because I think if we can get more people on here and more conversation going, that would be, of course, more optimal. So that could be something that they talk about in one of the meetings when I'm not there. Yeah, so Peter Griffin asks how we can get the word out there to the community about the forum. Um, so we had this crazy idea a while ago that we think will really drive, adoption, which is to, we just recently bought eos-forum.org, is to go out and buy eth-forum.org and remove the EOS sub, and we put an ETH sub in there instead. And then when people ask, how does this work on ETH for free? We tell them, well, it's actually built on EOS. That's clearly the way to drive and get the word out there in terms of adoption. No, but on a serious note, I mean, there's a few ways that we can go about this, right? I think we've seen a lot of love shown to us so far on Reddit in terms of all the community support, in terms of the forum and what we're building. And I think continuing to advertise the forum, and as long as good content gets continued to post on the forum, we'll start to see a community start to grow on there. When Reddit first got started, it was really slow. And the way they actually got Reddit started, and maybe this is something that we should look to do and take a page out of their book, is the way they got Reddit started is they would actually take content from other websites and automatically post it over to Reddit. And then eventually, as the community started to grow on Reddit, they started to tone that down a bit. And eventually now, obviously, they don't do that anymore. At least the Reddit team doesn't. But there's a lot of people now who have written bots, for example, using the Reddit API that still automatically cross-post stuff over to Reddit. So that might be something we look to do as a means of like news aggregation to get more things over onto the forum. Yeah, I think more activity on the forum is definitely going to help garner more community interest as a whole. For the record, just so you guys know, you don't have to type. If you have a microphone, feel free to use it. Just letting the New York community members and those who are listening know that if you're willing to speak, you're more than welcome to speak. The fix says we don't have voice changers. That's a fair point. So I guess actually that's the point I should touch on, which is if you're a new listener and you're wondering, why is this guy using a voice changer? Um, I value anonymity online. I'm not like too crazy about it per se, but I value it enough that I think people need to be more cautious online, and we've gotten too complacent with giving away our identity and our personal information for free. Um, for example, I see people signing up all the time on, these exchanges on these crypto exchanges, and they give away their KYC information, and you don't know how they're storing that information. You don't know what they're doing with that information. So it's sort of baffling to me that people are, willing to do this with minimal credibility of these actors. So I think anonymity online is a really important thing, and I also think that uh, other values that are really important are freedom of speech and freedom of expression. And that's a big part of why I started working on Novusphere, was to help build platforms where people can freely communicate their ideas and they can't be censored. Because one thing that we've seen historically is um, on practically any form of social media, there's heavy censorship all the time, and you end up with really biased narratives being pushed. So I think censorship is definitely a really dangerous thing. So I'm actually strongly in favor of the new direction that Dan has been going in, which is to, if you can't enforce it programmatically, then you shouldn't try to enforce it at all. Because I think, like when we saw in the early days of EOS, there was a lot of slander passed around with the ECAF, which is when they responded to things, um, people freaked out, and there's a lot of trolling that happened as a result to it. And then when they weren't responding to things fast enough, people also freaked out and they were like, what are these guys doing? Despite the fact that in the early stages, and maybe it's still like this now, honestly, I haven't kept up to date with it. The ECAF was community funded, or, I think those people were potentially, working for free to handle that. So, um, governance is a tricky thing, and it's definitely not something to easily get right. And I think a lot of people give Dan way too much shit in terms of like, you should have seen this coming. Because there's a lot of things where it's like, you won't know until you try it, especially with like this governance stuff. And, I feel like a lot of people put a lot of blame on him when um, he changes his mind about how something should be done. And I don't think changing is a bad thing. I think it shows that he's willing to listen to the community, and he's willing to sort of work out ideas and brainstorm with the community. Yeah, I haven't really followed the whole Thomas Cox versus Dan in terms of the governance sort of debate that's been happening. But it's definitely a complicated issue that I don't think there's an easy solution for it. I think one solution that I saw tossed around that I sort of liked was the idea that you have a sidechain that has the ECAF on it. And so if you want to have the benefits of the ECAF, you use the sidechain, and otherwise, if you're not on that sidechain, then you're sort of in the Wild West. So if you're not on the sidechain, you get hacked and your funds get stolen. Sorry, there's nothing we can do for you. But if you're on the sidechain that has the ECF, okay, well, you've opted into them, being able to intervene. And so there is something that they can do for you. So that might be an oversimplification of like the discussion that I saw before, but I think that might be one way to go about things. In the future, for the record as well, I'm more than happy after we're done covering the updates related to our project to discuss things that are going on in crypto in general, as well as what's going on in EOS in general. I see these meetups as just specifically that, a meetup. The Novusphere community sort of just getting together to discuss what's going on, discuss our opinions on certain things, and then as discussion happens, it's good to expose yourself to other ideas and other solutions to problems. So I hope as we grow as a community, we begin to discuss some of those things. So I really like the discussion direction that we recently just started in when we were talking a little bit about the governance of what's going on in terms of EOS. They're talking about, okay, so Fix asked, did I report that bug to EOS Flare? They're talking about the one I mentioned, like, yesterday, right? It's not a big bug. They're displaying the number of bytes in a transaction wrong. If you compare, blocks.io to EOS Flare, you're gonna get a different result for how big a transaction is. So, I'm not actually sure which one's right. I'm gonna go on a limb and say blocks is probably right. So EOS Flare is displaying incorrect information for how big a transaction is. It's not a critical bug. It's not as critical as the XSS vulnerability that I reported a while ago. So now they know. If they decide to listen to the voice chat, then they managed to make it 40 minutes in. Okay, well, I think that's about it for this week's meeting. So just as a reminder, I said I actually won't be able to make it to at least the next 2 weeks, I'd say, of meetings. Um, I'm gonna be busy on the weekend, but I'll be around in the Discord. So if anyone needs anything, feel free to reach out to me, and I'll be here in the discussions. Um, Up to Crypto Mom and Unicorn if they'd like to do the weekly meetings. I personally think they should do one next week so Unicorn can give an update on the stuff that he's been working on and sort of get you guys up to date with that. But their call on that, and hopefully I can get my stuff sorted out so that I can get back to doing these meetings. Yeah, I'll send him a DM and maybe he can give an update in the chat about what's going on in regards to the enemy interface that he was working on. So just to clarify there, Road Crypto said in the chat he was asking if Code Blue could give an update on what he's been working on. And yeah, I definitely agree that an anime interface helps tap into a separate market that we're currently not really going after. Okay, guys, so thank you for coming out to the meeting. If you have any other questions, feel free to post them in the chat, and I'll get to them when I can. And I'll try to let the community know as soon as when I'll be able to start making meetings again. I'll look forward to some of those features that I mentioned earlier in the chat. that's coming to come out in the short term in the next over the next couple days, next like week or two for the forum. And yeah, that's about it. All right, take care, guys.